know what? The Christian connection in rock music almost never looks the way people expect. Not crosses on album covers or Bible verses in liner notes. These are bands operating at the center of mainstream rock, punk, and heavy metal with full credibility, real audiences, and serious critical respect. And a faith dimension most listeners never knew was there. 10 bands where the music makes the case entirely on its own terms. The surprise comes after. AD is where the argument is strongest. Former members of Kansas, actual progressive rock pedigree, built inside one of the most respected secular bands of the 70s. When I listen to their music, I hear sophisticated composition, real instrumental ambition, and arrangements that required genuine craft to construct. Secular prog fans who found this music often had no idea about the Christian context, and more importantly, they didn't need to. The music justified itself entirely on its own terms. That's the cleanest version of what this list is supposed to be. A band you encounter, respect on pure musical grounds, and then discover the context later like a second surprise arriving after the first. Their Kansas history should have opened doors. Instead, it got recategorized the moment faith entered the conversation. Prog fans who would have welcomed them never knew to look. That is not a minor oversight. That's a genuinely strange gap in rock history. Here's the one that stops people cold. Kansas. Kerry On Wayward Son. Dust in the Wind. One of the most recognizable bands in classic rock, with a catalog that has never left radio rotation in 50 years. Kerry Livgren, who wrote most of their defining material, was on a spiritual journey that shaped the lyrics of their biggest records and eventually led him to a clear Christian faith. When I listen to Leftoverture or Point of No Return with that context, the lyrics don't suddenly sound different. They sound like they always did, which is exactly the point. Kansas wasn't operating in a Christian music bubble. They were at the absolute center of mainstream rock, writing music that millions of people connected with deeply, and the spiritual content was right there the whole time. Nobody noticed because it didn't sound like what people expected Christian music to sound like. That gap between expectation and reality is what the entire list is built on. The Jimi Hendrix story may be apocryphal, but the talent behind it absolutely is not. Phil Keaggy is regarded by serious guitarists as one of the finest players alive, the kind of musician other musicians talk about in reverent terms. And almost nobody outside Christian music circles knows his name. When I listen to Keaggy play, I don't hear a Christian guitarist. I hear a guitarist. Full stop. The technique, the feel, the melodic instinct, all operating at a level that needs no qualification. He belongs in the same conversation as the players who get documentary treatment and lifetime achievement recognition. But he doesn't get that conversation. The faith association absorbed him completely. If you put his playing in front of someone who'd never heard his name, they'd immediately ask why they didn't know about him. That question doesn't have a satisfying answer. Undercover is the band on this list that secular punk audiences are most likely to encounter and least likely to question. Their punk and new wave sound was the real thing, not an imitation. The aggression in their records belonged naturally alongside mainstream American punk acts of the era. When I listen to God Rules or Branded, I don't hear a band approximating punk from a safe distance. I hear a band that understood the genre from the inside. The Christian content was embedded in the attitude rather than announced in the packaging, which is why listeners who found this music through secular channels often didn't register the faith dimension until they looked closer. That's the version of crossover that works best. A band so fluent in a genre's language that the additional layer of meaning arrives after the music has already done its work.
It's alright. Peace is gonna come someday, and it's alright.
Mylon LeFevre had secular rock credentials before most bands on this list existed. He'd recorded with secular artists, lived the rock life, operated inside the mainstream industry, and then converted. When he formed Broken Heart, he wasn't performing a version of rock. He was bringing the real thing back with him. When I hear sheep in wolves' clothing, I don't hear a Christian band trying to sound like arena rock. I hear arena rock that happens to be Christian. The production, the performances, the hooks, all at the level of mainstream contemporaries without apology. That's what makes the obscurity so strange. LeFevre didn't have to prove he belonged in rock. The mainstream had already accepted him before faith arrived. The label closed the door before the music could speak for itself. Lifesavers Underground makes the least concession to expectation in any direction. The sound is raw, chaotic, and deeply embedded in underground punk and alternative in a way that needed no translation or apology. When I listen, I hear a band operating from the same urgency and friction that defined the best secular underground acts of the era. Nothing about the music signals its origins. The faith content and the punk content coexist without negotiating with each other, which is a harder thing to pull off than it sounds. That refusal to compromise in either direction is exactly what gives the music its credibility, and also what kept it confined to a small audience. The surprise isn't just that they were Christian, it's that they were this committed, this sonically honest, and this completely invisible to a wider world that would have respected them. Lost Dogs are a supergroup, and that framing matters here because the credibility arrived pre-assembled. Members drawn from some of the most respected bands in the Christian alternative world, with secular critical reputations already established independently. When I listen to their records, I hear alt country and roots rock with genuine soul and songwriting craft that operates without any genre qualifier in front of it. The music doesn't announce itself, it just works. What makes them fit this list specifically is how completely they elude the expectations people carry about Christian music. Nothing about the sound, the production, or the lyrical approach signals the context. A listener encountering them through an Americana lens would place them confidently in that world and be genuinely surprised to learn otherwise. The supergroup format actually delivered on its promise here, and somehow managed to do it in almost complete mainstream invisibility. Think of the mothers and the baby. Throw the better guns away. Yeah, long gone. Sacred Warrior makes the case on pure technical grounds, which is exactly the right argument for this list. Progressive metal serious enough that secular metal audiences who found it respected it without needing any other context. The musicianship is real. The compositions are ambitious. The production is heavy in the way metal is supposed to be heavy. Not as an approximation, but as a genuine structural commitment. There's no gap in quality, no sonic qualifier that places them outside the mainstream metal conversation. of their era. The only difference was the label and the distribution channel. Strip those away, and you have a band that belonged in the technical metal conversation happening at exactly that moment. That conversation happened without them. That absence is a real loss for anyone who cares about the genre.
Deep inside you can find the answer. You can wipe all fears away.
I am the witness of disaster.
Bloodgood didn't want your approval, and that comes through in every track. Heavy, aggressive, uncompromising metal that took darkness seriously, rather than decorating around it. Their heaviness was genuine enough to earn underground credibility from audiences who had no idea about the Christian context and wouldn't have cared. The darkness in their music wasn't a contradiction of the faith content, it was an expression of it, which is a more sophisticated theological position than most metal bands ever attempted.
Hands are touching, no one speaking, his eyes are empty.
But the refusal to soften anything worked against them in both directions. Too dark for Christian audiences, too spiritually explicit for secular metal crowds. That double rejection defined their reach. What they kept was their identity. History barely acknowledges it. The music makes the case without any help from history. Stryper goes last because they're the one band on this list everyone already knows is Christian. And that's exactly the point I want to end on. Because knowing doesn't mean understanding. Stryper charted on MTV. They sold out arenas. They delivered genuine heavy metal. With real riffs, real hooks, and real production at a moment when that standard was being set by the biggest acts in the world. When I listen to Hell with the Devil, I don't hear a Christian novelty act. I hear a tight, confident, arena-ready metal band competing on equal sonic terms with everything around it.
Can't explain just what you do.
The yellow and black spandex was outrageous, but so was every other band on MTV in 1986. The difference is that Stryper gets remembered for the Bibles and the others get remembered for the music. That asymmetry tells you everything about how context shapes legacy. They broke through and still got marginalized because once the label is applied, it follows everything. Even success doesn't remove it. The music was never the barrier, the conversation around it was. That's 10 bands where the music was always the argument. Maybe you know them all, maybe some are new for you. Hopefully at least one made you go check them out and listen to their music. Drop the ones I missed in the comments and let me know who deserves the next list.
It's rolling, it's the rolling stone.
Like as a bad to take a fall. And that's left us all words too soon.
Hands are touching, no one speaking, his eyes are empty.